Welcome back to another episode of Book Talk Weekly. In this series, I talk about the books I'm reading. I don't give them any kind of numerical grade. What I do is try to give you an idea about whether or not it might be a book that you'd be interested in reading. Today, we're going to be talking about The Swerve, How the World Became Modern by Stephen Greenblatt. I like to call it the original hipster, but more on that in a minute. So I picked up this book knowing absolutely nothing about it. I saw the tagline and the awards that it had won, and I thought maybe this would be something that I would like. Reading the tagline, How the World Became Modern, made me think that maybe it was about one of the many great inventions that has ushered in the modern world. So think the wheel, the printing press, electricity, phone, car, airplane, cell phone, internet, you know. Turns out that's not what it's about at all. It is about a discovery, but it's not a discovery of the future. It's a discovery about the ancient past. Before we get into the plot of the book, let's talk a little bit about the accolades that it's won. It won the 2012 Pulitzer for General Nonfiction. It also won the 2011 National Book Award for General Nonfiction. So when I read that, I thought to myself, time to hit up Wikipedia and see if anyone's done that before. Turns out, 4 people have done it before Greenblatt. Richard Rhodes did it in 1987 with his book, The Making of the Atomic Bomb. Then the next year, Neil Sheehan did the same thing in 1988 with A Bright Shining Lie. Tina Rosenberg did it in 1995 with The Haunted Land, Facing Europe's Ghost After Communism. And then, once more, in 1999, John W. Dower did it with his book, Embracing Defeat, Japan in the Wake of World War II. What I did find interesting was that each of these books was about war or its aftermath, and the events of them took place in the last 80 years. For Greenblatt, not so. His characters lived 600 and 2,000 years ago. Speaking of Greenblatt, let's talk a little bit more about the author. Greenblatt is a professor of humanities at Harvard University. All of my research online points to that being a halfway decent school. Though he is the author of this book, he's most famous for his biography of William Shakespeare entitled Will in the World. Is Carmen Sandiego. He has an upcoming illustrated manuscript that I think will be even more popular entitled Where's Wildo? The main character of the book is a man who lived in the 15th century. His name was Poggio Bracciolini, which in Italian roughly translates to broccoli pogo stick. Poggio was an accomplished scribe. This is an example of his exquisite handwriting. This was enormously valuable in his time before the printing press because legibility was paramount. Poggio used his writing ability to secure employment. There are 3 reasons why I believe Poggio was the original hipster. 1. He wrote with a pen because he was too good for computers. 2. He spoke Latin, which everyone knows is a dead language. And 3. He was a book hunter, which means he was discovering things before they were cool, before it was cool. Poggio spent a lot of time cavorting around Europe looking for old, forgotten manuscripts in monasteries. That led to the central event of this book, which plays out like the plotline of a novel by renowned author Dan Brown. In the dead of winter, in a German monastery, Poggio makes a fascinating discovery. He discovers the sole remaining copy of a manuscript called De Rerum Natura, or On the Nature of Things, by Lucretius. The fascinating thing about this text is that it predated Poggio by 1,400 years, so it's 2,000 years old. Greenblatt devotes a large section of the book to the myriad of reasons why a manuscript might not survive from ancient times until today. But suffice it to say, the chances of it surviving as the only copy left in the world were infinitesimal. This book is built around that discovery, which Greenblatt proposes is the event that brought about the modernization of the world. You can really tell the importance of this document based on what Poggio did next. He sent it to his friend Nikolai to make a copy and didn't receive it back for more than 12 years. Whoops. How can finding a book bring about the modernization of the entire world? To understand that, you need to learn a little bit more about the antagonist of the book.
Martyrdom. Flagellation. Epicurean singing campaigns. Terrible fashion.
The church was so busy with all of these things and yet still found the time to keep the world from modernization. Greenblatt isn't pulling any punches with the church. Along with the typical stories you've probably already heard of Galileo and Copernicus's run-ins with the church, he devotes a big chunk of this book to it. It got to the point where it was almost like there was two books here, one about how awesome Poggio is and one about how terrible the church was. After a while, I was saying in my head, Stephen, okay, we get it. So if the church is the antagonist of the book, who's the protagonist? Is it Poggio? Is it Lucretius? No, it's humanism. Humanism is Greenblatt's true hero. While Poggio and Lucretius might make up the main characters of the book, it's the ideas and ideals of humanism that Greenblatt is rooting for. So what was in this manuscript, in this poem, on the nature of things? Why did it bring about such a change? Greenblatt does go into detail about the themes of the poem. Some of those things include, everything is made of atoms. Atoms are eternal and infinite. The universe is random. From there, he goes into the crux of his argument. From those points, we can extrapolate that there is no afterlife. Death is meaningless. Religion is just superstition. So he argues that this was the turning point in history. Ridding themselves of God, humans are finally able to ascend to modernity. Renaissance thinkers, inspired by Lucretius, used humanistic ideals to facilitate the beginning of the modern age. Some of the Renaissance creatives Greenblatt argues were influenced by Lucretius were painters like Sandro Botticelli, probably best known for this piece, The Birth of Venus, and Leonardo da Vinci. If you haven't heard of him, I'm not sure what to tell you. Also, poets like Boiardo, Ariosto, and Tasso. And of course, Greenblatt's favorite playwright, Mr. Shakespeare. So, is this book for you? On the one hand, you might like this book if you're interested in delightful little tidbits of historical information, like why did monks never write at night? Where did the Roman typeface, so common nowadays, come from? What were the many ways in which a book would not survive from the ancient times until now? Another reason you might be interested in this book is if you are fascinated by how books worked pre-Gutenberg. You can learn a lot about how they wrote, what they wrote on, or how valuable a scribe really was at that point in history. Another reason you might like this book is if your lunch money was stolen by the Roman Catholic Church. On the other hand, this book might not be for you if you're a Roman Catholic Church fan. He gets pretty scathing. Another reason why you might not like this book is if you're not into historical nonfiction or you're really into historical nonfiction. I say that because this book is historical nonfiction, so if you don't like it, you're not gonna like it. If you're really into it, I feel like this book doesn't really scratch very far below the surface. There aren't going to be references that fly over your head, and I think that it's a consequence of trying to write something that's both scholarly and popular at the same time. With that being said, Greenblatt does provide an exhaustive list of sources, which means that you can easily find more stuff to read if this doesn't scratch the itch for you. The last reason not to read it is if you hate hipsters, because you're going to hate Poggio. If you're interested in this book or its subject, I wanted to point out a few more videos you might be interested in. Here's an interview with Greenblatt from PBS. Here's another with Big Think, where he talks about On the Nature of Things and its effect. Here's a talk with Margaret Graver, a professor at Dartmouth, where she talks about Lucretius and his poem. For a critical review, maybe even a rebuttal, you may be interested in Bishop Robert Barron's take on the book's simplicity here. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Book Talk Weekly. If you've already read the book, what's your opinion on Greenblatt's take of the influence of the church? What do you think would have happened if Lucretius's work had been lost to history? Do you think Poggio was a hipster? Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget, of course, to like and subscribe to get notified of new content as I make it. That wraps up this episode of Book Talk Weekly. Until next week.